Hi everyone, it's me. From the destruction of entire cities to sinister attacks by ruthless dictators, here are 5 times history nearly ended. Number 5. The Great Fire of London. The Great Fire of London started in Thomas Farriner's bakery. He was an ordinary Londoner who woke up one morning in 1666 to find his house was on fire. With his family asleep at the time, he ran to get help, but there was nothing anyone could do. By the next morning, an entire block of buildings had been reduced to ashes. This was a disaster of unimaginable proportions. It spread from building to building, and soon a strong wind fanned the flames. It seemed like the whole city was going to burn down. After 5 days of total havoc, the fire finally stopped. But not before destroying 13,200 homes and other structures. These included some of London's most iconic landmarks. The fire destroyed St. Paul's Cathedral, which was being rebuilt at the time after being damaged in an earlier blaze. Other notable casualties were the Custom House, where most of England's revenue was collected, and the Exchange, the center of London's commercial activity. Some people tried to save what they could, and others just stood by and watched. Everyone was affected by this catastrophe. But why? Well, it turns out that Thomas Farriner's oven is likely what caused the fire in the first place. It had become red hot and then set a nearby straw mattress alight. There wasn't much that could be done about it. People were forced to flee the city with their lives. All that was left was the smell of burning wood and the sound of crackling flames. When the smoke cleared, Londoners looked around them and saw a city forever changed. Over the next few years, the capital was redesigned and rebuilt. It emerged from the disaster even stronger than before. Number 4. 9/11 attacks. On September 11, 2001, nearly 3,000 people lost their lives in the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. 2 planes were hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. A 3rd plane was flown into the Pentagon, and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. The attacks sent shockwaves across the globe, and no one could believe what they were seeing on their TV screens. On that fateful day, 81 people jumped or fell from the towers as they desperately tried to escape the inferno below. Those who witnessed it said the air was filled with dust and debris, and the heat was unbearable. People fled the area as fast as they could, but the damage had already been done. The Twin Towers were symbols of America's financial success, and they had been brought down by a group of terrorists known as Al-Qaeda. They took over the planes and intentionally crashed them into the symbolic buildings. But why? Well, the Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden claimed responsibility for the attacks and told the BBC that it was revenge for America's presence in the Middle East. No. 3. The day the dinosaurs died, around 66 million years ago. An asteroid or comet entered Earth's atmosphere, traveled at a speed of 43,000 miles per hour, and then smashed into the planet's surface near the Yucatan Peninsula. This event triggered the most catastrophic natural disaster in history, and within a few short years, most life on Earth had been wiped out. Well, the impact created a crater 180 miles wide and 124 miles deep. It also triggered earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic activity all around the world. But perhaps the worst thing was the amount of dust that was thrown into the atmosphere. This blocked out the sun and caused global temperatures to plummet. Plants died, and the food chain collapsed. The age of dinosaurs had come to an end, but we were just getting started. The scientists realized that something big had happened because there was a layer of iridium in the rock. This is an element that comes from space. So it must have come from an asteroid or a comet. They found other evidence around the world in the form of tektite deposits. These are small, glassy rocks that formed when fragments of the asteroid burned up in the atmosphere. While the impact itself only affected a small part of the planet, its effects were felt everywhere. Even today, scientists are still studying what happened back then and how it led to the extinction of so many species. What they do know is that if something similar were to happen again, it would be bad news for us humans. Number 2. The sinking of the Titan. In 1911, the captain of the Titanic wrote to the captain of another ship and warned him about the dangers of iceberg. It is absolutely necessary that every ship proceeding down the course should go slower than 10 knots, he said. Unfortunately, his warning was ignored, and 4 years later, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank. This resulted in the deaths of more than 1,500 people, and it was the deadliest sinking of an ocean liner in history. On April 14, 1911, the Titanic was sailing across the North Atlantic. There were 2,224 people on board. At around 11:40 p.m., the ship struck an iceberg on the starboard side. This caused a series of gashes along the hull. In less than 3 hours, the ship was underwater. People fled the sinking vessel in lifeboats. Others stayed on board until the very end. And still, others did their best to help those around them. Women and children were given priority on the lifeboats, but many people refused to leave without their loved ones. Some people survived by clinging onto pieces of debris. Others were rescued by nearby ships, but most of the passengers and crew perished. There were only 3 lifeboats available for the hundreds of people who needed them, and although they did save some people, it wasn't enough. The Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable, but it turned out that was a myth. The captain had warned about icebergs, but the crew didn't take him seriously. They assumed that the Titanic was safe from harm. They never imagined it would sink to the bottom of the ocean. No one, the worst year in the worst century. The year 1918 was one of the worst in history. The First World War had been raging for 4 years, and millions of soldiers had already died. Then came the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed more than 50 million people worldwide. To top it all off, there was economic uncertainty and social upheaval. People were desperate for a fresh start, but it didn't look like it was coming anytime soon. In March 1918, a new type of influenza virus appeared in France. This was the Spanish flu, and it quickly spread around the world. Soldiers were particularly vulnerable because they lived in close quarters and often had to move from one place to another. But it wasn't just soldiers who got sick. Civilians were also affected, and before long, hospitals were overwhelmed with patients. The pandemic lasted 2 years, and it killed more people than the war itself. The virus was so deadly that it killed people of all ages, but it was especially dangerous for children and young adults. Some people recovered, but many died. The symptoms were horrible and included a high fever, chills, headache, muscle aches, fatigue, and a cough. But the worst thing was the possibility of pneumonia. If you got pneumonia, then you were unlikely to survive. It seemed like nothing could stop the virus in its tracks. Some places tried to ban public gatherings, but this didn't really work. The virus just spread to other areas. Eventually, the pandemic started to fade away, and life went back to normal. But the scars it left behind were deep. It was the deadliest pandemic in history, and it killed more people than any other disease. Thanks for watching. Which of these moments in history nearly ended the world? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.